All right, welcome. So glad you're here. This is a really critical topic, and we've got a great panel. We are Steve, our friend from Canada, had plane issues and was not able to join us, but he did put together for me some responses. So I'll do my best to do it. We got a great panel. It's a very critical and important issue. I want to have our speakers introduce themselves first, and then we're going to do some questions and then have some Q&A. All right, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. I'm Kevin Brady. I just retired at 26 years in Congress representing the Woodlands area of Texas, College Station. I focused on economic issues, chaired the House Ways and Means Committee, so did the 2017 tax reform bill, worked on 13 of 15 America's free trade agreements. And today, with Aiken, the company Aiken, I co-chair the new Coalition for North American Trade. And Drew, thanks for having us here at the Texas House. This is great.
You bet. It's a wonderful place.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here at the Texas House. Thank you very much, Drew. Thank you, Chairman. My name is Kenneth Smith Ramos. I am an economist. I'm a partner at an international consulting firm in Mexico called Agon. I worked for 28 years for the Mexican federal government, primarily in international trade negotiations, and I was a chief negotiator for the government of Mexico of the USMCA agreement. It's a real pleasure to be with you today.
Great. Fantastic. Okay, so you both were intimately involved in the creation of the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. So have you seen any challenges in its implementation, and what, in your view, could be improved?
So I would say, look, maybe let's start with what this agreement and how valuable it is. I'll start with this. Texas is made for trade. No other state in the country sells their ships more around the world than we do. It's a huge part of our economy. We are good at this. And the reason we are so good is because the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. It was NAFTA, signed in San Antonio some 32 years ago. And it was modernized by President Trump in 2020. That was the agreement that Ken and Steve negotiated with the agreement. But it's up for review this year, this summer. So we don't know sort of what the future of the agreement is. So I will tell you this, USMCA is the gold standard of trade agreements. I mean, the gold standard. It is a significant achievement, and it's because it does something no other trade agreement does. It has this secret sauce where zero tariffs and low barriers on products coming across the three borders. It exempts our businesses and you as consumers from other tariffs, and then it's integrated. So all three countries are bringing strengths to the table. So as a result of this agreement, just the new one we've seen, there's no question America is economically stronger, more secure, and better positioned to compete and win against China. And so is Mexico and Canada. And I'll leave you with this point. This is an amazing fact people don't think about. Because of USMCA, today Mexico and Canada together are America's largest customer, our largest investor, and our largest supplier all in one. Now think about that. If you're in business and you've got a client that is your largest customer by 5 times more than anyone else, it's your largest investor in your company, and by the way, they're your most important supplier. If you had a part like that, would you scrap that agreement or would you strengthen it? And that's really the question coming up in this summer. And the point being, Canada and Mexico together, their investment in America has surged the last 5 years in American manufacturing. They invest in American technology, including here in Austin, and they invest in ag and in other areas. And so right now, those two together are investing almost $900 billion a year in America. And here, the president's traveling the world, insisting countries invest in America. Canada and Mexico are doing it at like a record level for us. And then they're such great suppliers for us in energy and critical minerals and all of this. As a result, our companies, using strengths we share, can compete and win anywhere in the world from right here in America. So look, we got big challenges. There are No trade agreement's perfect. There's some issues we're going to need to work together on here, 3 countries here through this summer. But the point being, no state has more to gain from USMCA getting extended. No state will be punished more if it doesn't get extended. That's why there's a whole lot at stake economically come this summer.
No, thank you. I mean, just to put things in perspective, this is a trade agreement that for the 3 countries, it's worth $2 trillion in trade. Just between Mexico and the US, you're talking about almost $1 trillion in trade. And specifically for Texas, the amazing number here is that the trade that takes place between the state of Texas and Mexico is bigger than most bilateral trade relationships between countries. So what I mean by that is that 30% of everything that Texas sells to the world goes to Mexico. You're talking about $125 billion. And this is a relationship that has grown over the years to the degree in which just between Mexico and Texas, you almost have $250 billion in trade. And we're talking agricultural products, agribusiness, energy, advanced manufacturing, high tech, you name it. That's a very good example when we go to Washington this year, along with our Canadian counterparts, and talk about the benefits of having a trade agreement. I guess the biggest success story is the Texas-Mexico relationship, right? And it's important to understand what a trade agreement is. Essentially, it's not just about tariffs and how you have market access between both countries. There are 34 chapters that cover a lot of the rules that have to do with trade. You know, you may face zero tariffs when you export your good to one country, but it's no good if there are what are called non-tariff barriers that impede your product to actually getting to the market. Let's say obstacles at the border, obstacles when sanitary and phytosanitary measures are not applied correctly, rules that impede investment from U.S. companies from prospering in Mexico. So the agreement covers all of that and establishes commitments by the 3 countries to facilitate trade. And that really benefits the U.S. economy, the Mexican economy, and the Canadian economy. And so this year, what the review is about is analyzing whether this agreement can be extended for an additional 16 years. Right now, it's in effect until 2036, but if we have a successful review, it'll get extended from 16 years from 2026. That means 2042. So we have a strong chance to strengthen the agreement, as Chairman Brady was saying, solving whatever irritants, trade disputes that exist between the 3 countries, and advance towards a goal that I think is very noble, very positive for our countries, which is uniting the 3 economies in a way that allows us to compete better against China and against the rest of the world.
Awesome. Okay, so you are now co-chairing CNAT. Tell us what CNAT, CNAT?
Let me tackle that. So,
Yeah.
In the past, when there were trade agreements, every country would sort of put together their advocates, their cheerleaders for the agreement: business, agriculture, services, small businesses, all that. And so they would advocate to their government to support ratify an agreement. This time, we decided not, and I've helped lead those teams. But this time, we thought this one's going to be harder. You know, trade's a big issue right now. A lot of it's changing as we speak, and so we decided we would put together businesses and employers from all 3 countries working together to make the case why North American trade works for America, works for Mexico and Canada. And so that's what the coalition is. And what we're doing is both helping tell the story of jobs from this agreement, working with their governments, because this will be, all these negotiations are complex, you know, can be sensitive, Drew. And so our goal is to help create an environment for a really positive outcome, you know, in the review later this year.
And you know, one thing that is interesting is that in the case of Mexico, the USMCA has really changed completely our economy and has integrated more with the US. Back in 1992, when the agreement was originally signed, they did a polling in Mexico, and there were a lot of concerns as to whether Mexico would be able to really integrate with the US economy, compete with the rest of the world. They did a poll about a year ago where 85% of the Mexican population believes that the USMCA has been beneficial to the Mexican economy and that it should continue. So it's interesting because we have a lot of support in Mexico for continuing this relationship, and a lot of understanding in Mexico that the way to advance forward is not just looking at how Mexico grows or the US grows or Canada grows separately, but to try to do it together, to try to do it in a way that allows the region to grow together and to be stronger by being united, right? And so the efforts that we're conducting in CNAT involve creating a trilateral platform so companies, associations, think tanks work together in generating the right information as to why the agreement is working and go beyond just the general numbers. I threw at you a number of $2 trillion. Sounds very good. But what does it mean for agricultural exports for the US? What does it mean for the energy sector in Texas? What does it mean for manufacturing in the Midwest? We try to go at the granular level and generate the kind of data and information that can help people understand why the agreement is a success story for their communities. Because at the end of the day, the issue of trade has to be, you have to win the hearts and minds at the local level, right? And that's what we're trying to do in a way that we don't have just necessarily separate objectives in each country, but rather bringing in a whole set of stakeholders from companies, associations, and think tanks to really push in the same direction and to have our leaders in the three countries understand that a North America that's united is a stronger North America.
Great point. Okay, so what does success look like for the USMCA joint review?
Well, I really do believe that for starters, preserving what we have in North America, in other words, guaranteeing a tariff-free environment is what really strengthens all three countries. We know that the US has imposed tariffs on China, on the European Union, on many of its top trading partners. And part of our job is to work within the United States to convince key decision makers that the best way forward is not to fight amongst ourselves, not to have tariffs, not to have trade disputes. And that involves, on the part of Mexico, for example, solving obstacles that still exist in trade. It involves Canada also working with the US on solving some of these disputes and making sure that we clean the slate in a way so that we don't have trade disputes among us and we're able to preserve what we have and also start a complex discussion within North America. First of all, how do we successfully compete with China? How do we stop this dependency on a lot of products, critical minerals, chemicals, inputs for production from Asia, and we start producing them in North America? And another key element here, which is essential, is how do you introduce concepts that weren't even on the table 8 years ago when we were negotiating the agreement, such as artificial intelligence, the advance in information technologies? All of this requires a conversation, not just in each North American country, but doing it together, right? And a key example is every country is analyzing how artificial intelligence is affecting business, education, your personal lives. And we should have that discussion at the levels of the government, but always with the support of high-tech companies, experts in AI that can bring a vision that at the end of the day, hopefully it can help us understand how together we can create the necessary regulation, but also facilitate the growth of all these emerging technologies. I think that would be a great success of the agreement.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, one, strengthen the agreement, which means improve it. As Ken said, look, you will have some tensions between countries, and we do as well, but I'm always amazed, having looked at all these other free trade agreements, you know, our economies are so big in Mexico and Canada and the U.S. Our borders are so long. I'm always amazed we don't have hundreds of disputes, but we have a few. So let's work to solve those. Let's improve, in modernizing it some more in a number of areas. Really key. Preserve that special design for USMCA, that secret sauce of low tariffs, exemptions from steel and aluminum and copper tariffs and all that. And keep the three countries integrated because that's how we get, our food is cheaper. Our small businesses, the equipment they need is less expensive. They can compete and win. So we bring our strengths together. And then our final success means extending it for a longer period. Because the reason a lot of companies can build in America and sell American throughout the world is that they've got Mexico and Canada providing them really competitive ingredients and equipment and all that. And so that's driven by investment. So the longer this is extended, the more investment comes flooding into the U.S. and Mexico and Canada, not China, not Asia, not other countries. And Drew, that's that's the secret sauce and a longer extension that's going to be great for Texas.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to make a quick comment here, if it's possible, for those who are talking to either not talk or to move farther back. That would be great. We have concrete floors, and it's even hard for me to hear on my own panel. So if you all don't mind, those who are talking, I'm talking to you. Yes, wonderful, excellent. Thank you, appreciate it. The guy in the hat looks pretty menacing, so be careful with him.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Ramos, how is Mexico preparing for the review? How's the private sector being involved?
Yes, it's very interesting because ever since President Trump came into power in the United States, there's been a positive relationship with the Mexican government. The Mexican government came into office a year and a half ago. And I think there's been a very strong focus on cooperating, not only on the trade front, but also on many important foreign policy issues between Mexico and the US, on the issue of immigration, on the issue of security, which is a big issue for both countries. And there's been a lot of cooperation, which has allowed, on the one hand, for the Mexican government to strengthen its efforts, for example, to combat organized crime, to extradite criminals, to reduce immigration at the border. And those efforts really help to create goodwill between both countries. I think in addition to that, the Mexican government has been working actively on a long list of issues that it has had over the years in terms of trade, irritants, barriers that exist on the Mexican side, some barriers that exist on the US side, and trying to fix those prior to getting to the review of the agreement. The private sector in Mexico plays a very important role, as it does in the US and Canada. And ever since Mexico started opening up its economy, and we have to understand that until more or less the year 1990, the Mexican economy was one of the most closed economies in the world. So very high tariffs, very many restrictions to trade between even the top trading partners. And all of that started opening up in the 1990s, thanks to the NAFTA and, of course, to a large network of free trade agreements that we have. So based on that, Mexico has been working actively on diversifying its trade, and the accompaniment of the private sector is essential. When you're in a trade negotiation, the governments get inputs from the private sector as to what are the most sensitive elements for each sector. What do they need to see reflected in an agreement? Because the government recognizes that, the ones who innovate, the ones who create jobs, the ones who create new products is the private sector. So you have to consult them, you have to work with them constantly. And that's something that we have created in Mexico, which is called the Room Next Door. It's a private sector advisory council that helps the government understand what each sector needs. The needs of the textile and apparel sector is different than the one in the chemical sector, the one in the agriculture sector or energy. So you really have to tap into each one of these sectors, get their input, and that helps you have a better negotiating position. And many times what has happened over 30 years of free trade with the US is that the private sector in Mexico is perfectly in sync with the private sector in the US. So they work together in helping the governments, telling them, this is what I need in order for my sector to grow in the region. So they're working very closely together.
The Room Next Door. Sounds like a Hitchcock movie. What role should Congress play in the joint?
Yeah, so I think it's really important. The president's priorities coming into this one, he wants the agreement to be enforced. Like every country do what they said they would do 6 years ago. So there's some certain issues like dairy and digital taxes and intellectual property issues like that that need to be, the three countries need to sit down and resolve it and improve things, as Ken said. Secondly, he wants to see more like automobiles, more of the automobiles made in America content, steel, aluminum, the equipment in there, the auto parts. Want to see more of that. That'll be a priority for them. But for the president too, he really wants to focus on economic security, which means really us as a country and our neighbors, Mexico and Canada, be able to compete and win against a very aggressive China that plays by no trade rules, and we could go on a long time about that. So I think one of the biggest priorities, Drew, for him is to work with Mexico and Canada, to stop China from sort of gaming our agreement and moving their products in. putting up investment and screening barriers against China, which America has as well, but working with our two neighbors to do that. Making sure that we got critical minerals flowing across the borders. We learned during COVID that we weren't making our own medicines. We didn't have medical supplies. We didn't have ingredients to do them. So now we know we need to be building more of that here in the U.S. This agreement in that economic security portion of that will make all three countries, especially the U.S., less reliant. Less vulnerable to foreign countries. And so I think that's going to be the goal. And you asked for the coalition. What are we going to? Oh, Congress. So
Yes.
Congress has a big role. Constitutionally, they do trade in foreign commerce. They played a big role. I led that effort in Congress for USMCA. And so their role is to work with the administration to make sure this agreement's working and enforced, that we're tackling new things, and then working with the president and our trade negotiating team to make sure this gets done in a positive way and extended for the long term because in Texas, we're like a lot of states. If you put our jobs from the US-Mexico-Canada agreement together, it's the largest single employer in our state. Like we've got 1.2 million jobs, bigger than Walmart, bigger than ExxonMobil, bigger than Tesla, like lots of jobs. That's the case for most of the country. For every state has a lot at stake in this agreement, Republicans or Democrats. That's why we had such a bipartisan vote on behalf of this agreement. But I'll tell you, Republican states especially have twice as many jobs tied to this agreement and twice as many sales of made in America products to Mexico and Canada than our Democrat colleagues. And so, especially for the president's party, it's really important in those states, especially like ours, if this agreement has a good outcome. So, Drew, they have a big role to play. Senate Finance Committee just held a hearing. I was able to testify on it the other day. So yeah, your local representative and your U.S. senator is going to have a big role working with the president on this.
Agreed. And as you noted, no state has a bigger opportunity or potential negative. I think you did your job too well because you got all of the votes from the Texas delegation. It was
First time ever.
unanimous. That's
First
right.
time ever, yeah.
We disagree about whether you're casting a shadow, but they all got on board for that, and that's great. So we have a question that was to go to Steve, who may still be stuck in an airport somewhere in the world. The question to him was, the U.S. appears to have been working closely with Mexico on the USMCA review in recent weeks, while Canada only recently met with its U.S. counterparts. Are you concerned that Mexico and the U.S. have been making more progress? And do you think the U.S. may look at negotiating two bilateral agreements? I mean, clearly it helps to be here to do the negotiating. But his response was, there are various bilateral issues between Mexico and the U.S. and between Canada and the U.S. that the U.S. has indicated it would like to address during the USMCA review. This is not surprising. The USMCA already has various bilateral commitments that only apply to Mexico or Canada and annexes to various chapters, and in some chapters that apply differently to Mexico and Canada. I understand the list of U.S. issues for Mexico may be longer than the list with Canada, so it's not surprising those discussions began earlier. They will both move at their own pace. The integrated nature of the three economies means that the trilateral approach by far still makes the most sense for moving forward. Any comment you would have on
Yeah, I would say that I wouldn't be too worried by the fact that Mexico is starting conversations with the U.S. before Canada does. In fact, in the original USMCA negotiations, we sort of in the middle of the negotiation broke off into two different bilateral negotiations. It was the U.S. and Mexico discussing their own issues, Canada and the U.S. discussed them later. And at the end, we were able to craft an agreement for the three countries. I think that that would be the optimal outcome, without a doubt, because one thing that we don't notice, we talk a lot about tariffs, obstacles between countries, but one big intangible or one big element of benefit for the three countries is the fact that you have an agreement that applies with the same rules for all the three countries, right? So when you cross the border, you know what kind of treatment you're going to get when you go from the US to Mexico, from Mexico to the US, from Mexico to Canada. So everybody playing by the same rules gives you certainty. If you're a company that wants to sell an auto parts from Texas into Mexico or into Ontario, you know what the rules are. If you break it off into bilateral agreements, then you run the risk of not having the exact same rules, the exact technical standards. So when you want to sell an auto part, once again, or a piece of medical equipment, if you have different rules between the three countries, that just increases your costs. So at the end of the day, one of the top goals of the Trump administration that has been stated for this review is how do we align the economic objectives in North America in order to compete with the rest of the world? And our answer is you already have a trilateral vehicle where officials from the three countries, private sector from the three countries are meeting constantly under the umbrella of the agreement. Why don't we use this trilateral vehicle precisely to align these economic interests and strengthen North America? So I think that would be the optimum outcome.
So, Mr. Chairman, how should stakeholders like those that are here engage so the joint review reflects on the ground realities throughout North America?
Well, Drew, the reason we came to Texas House is we wanted to talk to Texas leaders and influencers in our state because we have so much at stake here. We all live busy lives. We don't focus every day on the U.S.-Mexico Canada agreement, but it's just a huge part of our economy. So really what we're seeking across all three countries, but especially here in our home state, we're just encouraging people to tell your story. You know, the jobs that are created, the sales you're making, the importance to your community. We have a lot of communities here on panels through the day. Make sure your member of Congress knows how important it is. Make sure your U.S. Senator knows how important it is, and they're talking to the president on your behalf, because at the end of the day, that makes a big difference. When I worked with President Trump, both on tax reform and USMCA, you know, he's unusual in that he'll talk to a dozen members of Congress a day by phone. That never happened. And so he stays very close. It makes a difference. He listens. You can persuade him,
100%
tell
agree.
him what's
Different
going on.
audiences. I mean, there might be the one person, but I would say like that's more the exception than the rule. It's a different audience who's consuming short form than long form, finding you on TikTok, consuming your SS, watching your full length video. Like they're all different.
So bottom
Well
line,
put. Yeah.
So let's pretend that didn't happen. And so, so look, the way he listens, and so having your representative and your senator talking to president on your behalf for your industry, your business, and even telling them where it's not working and they need to fix it. That's really going to be key. And in the past, the reason we've got trade agreements done is when we listen to our local economies and communities. And as a congressman, I'll tell you, I could point the small businesses in my communities that were selling to Mexico and Canada, farmers and their crops, our manufacturers locally, you know, and you got to be able to talk to the president about the importance. So that's one of the reasons we're here at the Texas House, kind of launching the coalition and the importance of this agreement for our state.
So, Mr. Ramos, what in your view should Mexico's position in terms of offensive and defensive strategy?
Yes, that's an important issue. I think Mexico has launched, as well as the U.S. and Canada, a long process of internal consultations. So asking stakeholders in Mexico what is working, what could be improved, what are the obstacles that they're facing when they trade with the U.S. and Canada. And so this has been going on for over 6 months now. And so I think the number one objective of the Mexican government, first of all, will be to preserve a tariff-free environment, to make sure that there is certainty when economic actors in the three countries are trading amongst each other, that they don't are weary of the fact that maybe next week tariffs will go up or new obstacles will occur, because certainty is the name of the game for any exporter and investor in the world. So that's one of the top offensive objectives, I would say. Another one on the I would say on the defensive side, it's twofold. On the one hand, to make sure that our trading partners, the U.S. and Canada, comply with what is established in the agreement, that we don't have backtracking. In other words, that we don't get a USMCA light at the end of the review, because we've spent 30 years creating a positive trilateral environment where we are one, and I would repeat this, the one trade agreement at the world level that has, in essence, no obstacles to any products traded between the three countries. This is very special because even in the relationship that the US has with the European Union, with Japan, with South Korea, with strong allies, there's not that level of openness in terms of the trade and investment environment. Just a data point. More than 50% of all the investment that has arrived in Mexico over the last 20 years comes from the US and from Canada. Primarily almost 40% from the US and the rest from Canada. The US is our number one investor and Canada is number 3. So we want to preserve that, and we want to preserve it in a way where the agreement, which now has this element of a 6-year review that we didn't have in the original NAFTA, the reason we introduced that is because we realize that technology changes very quickly, and the governments of the three countries have to try to keep pace with these technological changes. As I mentioned, 8 years ago, nobody was talking about the impacts in society of artificial intelligence, the advance in technology in the energy sector, the levels of environmental protection and protection of labor rights that we have today. So all of this has to be inserted into this living instrument so that we have regular reviews, and then most importantly, we open these consultation spaces so all of you in all the three countries can say, I think the agreement should be improved in this or that way. And that's something that keeps it in a way as a living instrument, as opposed to the way it was before, where it was approved and then a lot of people complained that it was so hard to get it done in 1993 that they just kind of locked it up and threw away the key. Now we have a mechanism through which people can opine as to how to improve the agreement. And I think that's going to be one of the main premises also of the Mexican government.
Great. We have time for questions. We have questions here. All right, so I do have a question. It is so cool that you got to work on something that has a multi-trillion-dollar impact. I mean, how cool is that, right? So talk a little bit about, if you might, your journey. I'm sure it was a direct line to shaping global trade, but can you talk a little bit about your backstory and how that informed your negotiation of the most important trade agreement and the most perfect one in the world?
No, thank you. I was very lucky that at a very young age, I finished undergrad and grad school in the United States, and I started actually working at age 22 on the original NAFTA negotiations. This was ages ago. Many of you weren't even born.
At 22?
At 22, yeah. And I tell you, one advantage in the Mexican government is that a lot of us that joined the government back then, when I'm talking about 1991, 1992, we did not know what we were getting into. Most of the people that were working on the NAFTA did not know what the impact was going to be to change completely the profile of our country, to bring us into an era of development of the growth of the middle class that we had failed to achieve in the previous 35, 40 years. And so I was very lucky to participate in that. Then I was working actually at the Mexican embassy in Washington, D.C., and I came back to Mexico, where I was what we called the NAFTA coordinator throughout the year 2000. And I was able to work in several sectors, in the manufacturing sector and negotiations, in agriculture, which are always tough negotiations between Mexico, the US, and the rest of the world. So I essentially started working as a grad student in an internship that was supposed to last 3 months at the Mexican embassy. Then the NAFTA negotiation started, and that was the start of a career. So I was very lucky to be at the right place at the right time and to work with people that had this vision that we needed to modernize our country, and the realization that we had to do it along with our number one trading partner. And luckily, on the other side of the border, there was the same vision back then. And we were able to build something which we really do believe has benefited both economies and also Canada, and something that should really be preserved towards the future.
Awesome.
So before I went to Congress, I was just a local Chamber of Commerce executive. So helping work with small businesses, helping grow your community, recruit new industry to it. So when I went to Congress, I loved creating jobs. So how do I create jobs? And what became very clear, in addition to get the tax code right, was it's not enough to buy American. We need to sell American all throughout the world. But when we try to do this, a lot of countries have sort of an American need not apply sign. You know what I mean? That makes it hard for us to to be able to sell our Texas products. And so I got involved in free trade agreements that would tear down that sign and turn one-way trade into the U.S. into two-way trade back into their countries, knowing if there's a level playing field for Americans, we'll win. We will succeed and create a ton of jobs and sell a bunch of stuff. And so that's how I got involved in the freedom to trade. I think it is in that freedom is the ability to buy and sell and compete anywhere in the world with as little government interference as possible. So if you build a better product here in Austin, Texas, the freedom to sell it anywhere in this world. But if someone else builds a better product in the world, the freedom for you to buy it for your family or your small business, that freedom drives our economy. The reason we have the largest economy in the world is free trade. We're not a victim of it. We are the best at it. And agreements like this are the gold standard because it doesn't have tariffs that drive up prices. It doesn't have barriers that slow things down and make it harder. It really, here's my thought. Even great countries need allies. We need allies because when you put the strengths together, you're stronger as a country. And we want our allies to be strong. No one wants weak allies. You want people with you. And especially at a time where supply chains and innovation, the race to win innovation and win against China and others has never been more important for our kids and grandkids. And so agreements like this that are really the gold standard are not just our past, it's our future. And Texas really leads the way, proving why this works. So that's how I got involved. I love it. I think it makes a huge difference for just working families in our state and I think across America.
I see a number of economic development or developers in here. I saw Tina earlier. I think she's still here. Dory's here. I saw the Chamber Opportunity also. So you've got a lot of interest from the business community that are here. I wonder, in kind of closing, maybe it's a two-part. One is, who are you rooting for in the World Cup? But talk about that moment, right? Of the three countries coming together for the World Cup, and then secondarily, let's say you were that 22-year-old again. What advice would you give to young folks about what the world might look like and how to prepare with how fast that things are picking up?
Absolutely. Just first of all, in the World Cup, I think it's a great opportunity for the three countries to be hosting the World Cup the same year that we're doing the USMCA review. It may not appear to be directly related, but we saw it when they did the World Cup draw in the United States and the three heads of state of Mexico, the US, and Canada met. It gave the opportunity to send a message of unity, a message that we're working together in what is the sport that unites most of the world, right? And so these issues that are normally in diplomacy called or considered soft power are very important. The message that you send to the rest of the world that, yes, we are different countries with different histories, but we are interlinked through history, the societies, through families in the case of Mexico and the US, and certainly Mexico and Texas. And to build on that on the world stage, the World Cup, I think it's a plus. It sends a very good signal worldwide. And what you mentioned in terms of advice to the young people, I was just doing some of that today at the Texas House. There's some of the people that are working here with Texas House that are studying at UT. I met some students that have lived for a long time in Austin, but are from Ciudad Juarez or Monterrey in Mexico, and they're studying economics. And I think that really to follow their passion, to really believe that, you know, the discipline where they have a chance to grow, if it is economics, if it is trade, it is not something about the past. It is the way forward, right? I mean, trade, as Chairman Brady was mentioning, you know, it is about economic freedom and the possibility to contribute to the growth, not just of yourself personally, but of your community, of generating employment and economic opportunity or for the places where you live and where your family is. So I would really recommend people to really, it can be in the government, it can be in international organizations, in academia, but really international affairs and economics is not a type of employment that's going to disappear in the future. I think it's something that creates a great success for the communities and a great impact for society.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, like the Olympics, I've already got my team picked out for the World Cup. Know who I'm rooting for all the way through, and including baseball is my sport. So, obviously, the World Baseball Council. Those are a great thing. I would just say this as a young person, there's lots of freedoms in a country like ours, and all of them are so important. But pay attention to your economic freedom, because it really defines the opportunities you have, to become your best self, to have ideas and pursue them, to get a chance to make that mark. And not every company is a big company. When you're a small one starting out, you need to be able to buy the best and cheapest and whatever you need. And an agreement like USMCA allows you to not just succeed as a company, as a small business, but to be able to sell that, throughout millions of people. Because 95% of the world's customers are outside of America. We want you, with that new idea you have, to be selling it everywhere. So I guess my friendly advice would be, as we look at lots of things challenging us, and we have so many benefits here, but never lose sight sort of the economic freedom you have, and always protect it. Always make sure you're asking those who represent you to preserve that for you, because it changes your life, in my opinion.
Well, everyone, I want you to give a quick round of applause, but a meaningful round of applause.
Thank you so much.
It's fantastic. Additionally, I did want to thank Will and Marisa and the whole Texas House team. You guys, this has been fantastic. It's a beautiful location. Thanks to folks like Texas State as well, who opened up a branch in Mexico. I think that's an important move. To the Round Rock Chamber, who has been working so hard on economic development and has an office in South Korea. And to so many of you in this room for the work that you're going to be doing on this issue.
And Drew, thank you very much for monitoring the panel. Good to see you all. Thank you.